Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. What we have for you today is a modification to a third generation Toyota 4Runner. I'm going to put a CBI Off Road rear bumper on my 4Runner, and it's the one that's going to have dual swing outs, one for the spare tire carrier, and then I'm going to have a jerry can holder on the other side. The reason why I chose CBI is because I heard good things about them from people I know. One of them is my friend Choi, and this other guy Edwin, who have both been over my house, and I've checked out their bumpers. I really like the way they look. They had good things to say about them, so I decided to get one for my 98 4Runner. Looking behind me, you're seeing a lot of stuff on the floor. So when I called CBI, I started talking with one of the very helpful people there, and he was saying, hey, do you need anything else? And we started talking, and I said, well, I'm eventually going to put a front bumper on, and I want to put a winch on. I want rock rails. I want extra protection, extra skid plates. I looked at their front bumper and it looked pretty nice. I like the way it looked. It offers a ability to install a winch on it, so I bought their front bumper too. Then I looked at their rock rails and I liked the way those looked. I figured, why not order it from the same company? And then finally I bought their skid plates too, because it just made it simple to buy it from one place. They shipped it on 2 big pallets for me from Idaho, where they're located. And all this stuff in my garage is all that stuff. So the first part is installing the rear bumper. Part 1 is just going to show removing the OEM rear bumper and installing the CBI bumper. Part 2 is going to finish the job by installing the swing outs, installing the food tray, installing the jerry cans, and any other miscellaneous stuff that I'm forgetting. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the spare tire out of our way. If you were never forced to change a tire on your third generation 4Runner, let me show you where the tools are first. We're on the passenger rear seat. You lift up your rear seat. You lift up the carpet, and here's your tools. You have your tire iron here, you have your jack, and you have this long tool here that operates the spare tire mechanism. So you just pull that up and pull it out. You have to lift up your rear hatch, and this is the hole you insert the tool to access the spare tire carrier mechanism to lower it. So when you slide the tool in through the rear bumper, it goes into this mechanism, and then you crank it. It operates this piece that has a cable in it, and that's your spare tire carrier little winch. So like we said, slide the tool in and slide it in far enough to where you can feel the tool engage the spare tire winch, and then start going counterclockwise, and the spare tire is going to lower to the ground. Once the tire's on the ground, you still have to go a little bit further to free the cable and the little cup on the bottom of it. So you loosen it a little more, and then you can feed it out. Now it's free, and you can just drag your spare tire out of the way. So this thing isn't just hanging and dangling in our way, I'm going to tighten it up all the way to the spare tire winch. If you have the tow package, you'll have this tow hitch, and then you'll also have the wiring harness so you could hook up your lights. My 98 4Runner doesn't have this actual harness, but most of you will have it. So the first thing you would do is you get an 8mm socket and take the 2 bolts that hold this wiring harness onto the hitch. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the rear exhaust off the hanger so we can get this rear hitch off. This bolt back here is going to be hard to get out with the exhaust in the way, so we're just going to drop the hanger to where we can get it out easier. So I'm just going to use a pry bar, wedge it up against the frame member here, and push forward and work it off. The way I was able to manipulate this hanger off, I was able to wedge it between this tow hook, push on the rubber grommet, and slide it off. So now we can manipulate the exhaust. It's flexible enough that I can push it over to the side enough to where I can get an impact on there. That was a 17mm. This one here is also a 17mm. These are an 18mm for the tow hook on my rig. This is the last one holding it on to the passenger side. I'm just going to break this one free but not loosen it all the way, and then start working on the other side, because I don't want this hanging down with a lot of force, and it's going to make it harder to get the other bolts out. So that's good. It's just loose, but it's still holding the hitch on. It's the same thing on the driver's side. Starting from the back going forward, it's a 17, 17, 18, and 18 millimeter. This side is fully out, and then I got to take the last bolt that I left on the other side out. Now, most likely you're going to have a friend helping you, but for some reason, if you're trying to do this yourself and you just want to get the hitch out of the way, I've got the driver's side kind of supported with my leg while I take this last bolt out on the passenger side. Now I could just basically lower it down, bench press it, and it's out of the way. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the mud flaps off. There's 3 10 millimeter bolts we're going to take off. There's one here, and then there's one down here. There's also a couple plastic tabs we have to remove, and there's one little plastic tab here and one there. I'm just using my M12 Milwaukee tool to zip them out. I'm just going to get a screwdriver in and pry these out. There's a good chance you're going to destroy these pulling them out. I'm pulling them out with the needle nose pliers. Now the mud flap is off on the passenger side. We're going to do the same with the driver's side. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this plastic trim piece off the bumper, because there's bolts underneath here that we'll need to access to get the bumper sides off. So you go underneath the vehicle, there's tabs that I'll show you. You have to loosen up. So here's an example of one of the tabs. I'm just pushing up with my little pry bar to get them to go through the metal bumper. Just work them in to where they push in. We have all the tabs freed up underneath. We should be able to pull this out now. I think we're still a little bit stuck underneath. We got to loosen up a couple more. I think we got them all free now. Here we go. Now this pulls out. So you can see how the clip is designed. You just have to push in with a pry bar or a big screwdriver to where these compress in a little bit to free it from the holes that it fits into on the bumper. All these holes right here. You're just pushing in the sides of the plastic clip so it will compress in and free it of it. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the side parts of the bumper off on both sides. It's held on by a bunch of 12 millimeter bolts. The first one we're going to get to is right here. The next one we're going to remove is right here near the back, underneath. We're going to remove this one. This one was behind the mud flap. This last one is also hidden by the mud flap. It's right here. You can see the top of the bowl here. We're going to come in from underneath and zip this one out. Now this should be free. We're going to take this bracket off next. It's also being held on by 12 millimeter bolts. On both sides we have to loosen this bracket for the bumper. So there's one 12 millimeter bolt here and one here, and same on the other side. On both sides now we're going to release these two 12 millimeter bolts to finally free the bumper of the vehicle. It might be nice to have an assistant to hold the opposite side while you get these last two out. I'm going to support the bumper now because I know it's going to drop after I get this last one out. And then we should be able to pull this out. And voila, this section of the bumper is free, and that was the last piece. For the two rear bolts closest to the front of the vehicle, they're not welded into the frame. They actually use this little tool to slide the nuts in the right place so you can put the bolts in. We're just going to pull this out of the frame, and you can see how they do it. They weld the nuts on to this little thing, and you would slide it in, And the CBI bumper has something similar to where we're going to install bolts utilizing a rod to get them into the frame rail. If you installed a fancy lift like I installed, I've got this Radflow external reservoir lift that I bought from Sonoran Steel. Based off of the length of the reservoir lines, the appropriate place to mount it was way back here, tucked behind the rear bumper. When I actually installed these, I removed these bumper sides, drilled and tapped some holes here to mount it. Just by eyeballing what the CBI bumper looks like, it pretty much looks like where I mounted the external reservoirs for these rear shocks is going to get in the way. So I removed the bracket and I just stuffed the reservoir up on top of the frame rail for now. So we're not going to fight anything when we're trying to get the bumper in place. The next thing we're going to do is actually another modification, because we've heard from enough sources, while you're four-wheeling, if your bumper strikes something, like maybe a really steep angle, your bumper scrapes something, when the bumper pushes into the ground or a rock, it could push up into the body because these rear mounts are kind of free floating and flexible. What I have in my hand here is a modification for the rear body mount that Sonoran Steel makes. These are a solid polyurethane bushing, so when you do strike something with your rear bumper, the rear bumper is not going to be able to push up and do body damage. So this is a nice upgrade, and I'll put a link to these in the video description. You can read more about them straight from the Sonoran Steel website. The bolt for the rear body mount has to come out through the top, and it's right behind here. So we have to first take off this trim piece, which is held on by 5 Phillips head screws. And then we're going to take this Phillips head screw for the rear cargo carrier to hook in. And then we're going to pull this out to where we can get at that bolt. We show all this in great detail in our body lift video, but I'm going to use a tool from this trim removal kit that I bought on Amazon. I'll put a link in the video description if you want to buy one. There's clips. Everywhere there's a screw, there's a clip. So I'm going to get underneath there with the tool and pry up. We're going to zip this out. Now we just start pulling and pull this out. You could get your hands in here. So once it's pulled back far enough, then you could reach in here. You just pull this rubber plug out, and now you can see the bolt down there that we're going to have to pull out. It's a 14mm nut on the bottom and a 17mm bolt head on the top. The bolt head on the top has a special washer with tabs on it that prevent it from twisting, so you should be able to just zip these out without holding the top bolt. With the nut off on the bottom, we could just push this through the top. You can see those tabs I was talking about, which allows you to remove the nut without holding the top of the bolt. The body of my 4Runner is pretty high up right now, so we had to figure out a series of blocks to do it. So this is what we came up with. One 4x6 and a couple 4x6s on end. Right now, just with the rear body mounts loose, we're not going to get enough movement to get the rear mounts out. So we're going to go forward one body mount, loosen those 14mm nuts to where when we jack this up, we'll get a little more movement out of the body to where we can get the mounts out. The next body mount forward of the rear mounts is right in front of the rear tires, right here on each side. We went ahead and actually loosened all the body mounts with the exception of the very front ones, because we don't want to put any undue strain on those mounts when we're jacking up the rear end. So all of them are loose except for the very front ones near the front bumper. Now we had to put another 4x6 in this assembly so we can get the jack high enough to lift the body to where we get the mounts out. So the suspension is going to start to relieve, and then once their suspension relieves enough, the body will start to move. And we'll start off leaving it there for now and see if we can get the body mounts out. We have the body jacked up, and because the jack is just not perfectly stable like I would like it, I put a couple pieces of plastic 2x4, they're recycled plastic, just to maintain that gap. So if something happens to the jack, it's going to come down on these blocks and not crush my hands. So now we're going to remove the two 14mm bolts that hold this mount to the frame. I'm using this long 14mm box end for extra leverage, and I'm going to fit it on and loosen it up. Same with the other one. Once you've turned it enough times, you can most likely get it off with your hands unless you're dealing with a lot of rust. Now you got to lift this up and slide it out. And this is your old mount. Steve at Sonoran Steel does us all a favor by nicely marking top, and he zip ties the assembly together so everything stays intact when it's being shipped. So cut the zip ties out. Take the bottom part of the mount off for right now. So it's the bottom polyurethane mount and the big washer. And then you got to slide this in place. See this sleeve? This thing will move on you. So I'll just push it down to where it's flush with the top there. Try to slide it in like so. And then put your washer on top. Now I'm going to grab the bolt on top and slide it through. When you're coming in with this bolt, just make sure that these tabs are captured inside the body with those little tabs that hold it in place. You'll see what I'm talking about when you're doing this. With the body still up, we're going to get the bolt started. We noticed with the width of this polyurethane mount, as the bolt was tightening down, the washer is hitting. So what Sean came up with is he pulled the bushing up. We got the bolt tightened down, and then after the fact, if it's rubbing on the washer a little bit, no big deal, because it's just going to compress into the washer and it's not going to really damage the mount. So we suggest pulling it up to get the bolts in first and then pulling it down. Okay, on both sides we have the 14mm bolts tightened most of the way, but still loose to give this plate of the mount just a little bit of play, just in case as we're lowering the body down, this mount is having a hard time centering on this. So a little bit of play in this might help us out. We're going to take our blocks out of the way on both sides. And now we're going to lower the body down. For the bottom part, it's pretty self-explanatory. This faces up. Slide that on. Slide your washer on. Get your 14mm nut started. Now that the mount's together, we're just going to cinch up these 14mm bolts. I don't have a torque spec for you. I just suggest you to get them nice and tight. For this rear mount and any of the other mounts you loosened, a good torque spec for these body mounts is in between 20 and 30 foot-pounds, so we just torqued them to 25 foot-pounds and called it good. Looking on the CBI website, there wasn't any instructions for the plate bumper, but they did have something for the hybrid rear bumper, which is pretty much the same thing. The first thing they say to do is to measure 3 7/8 from the last bolt in the rear, and on the center mark it so you can drill a hole. We're kind of thinking that we're going to get the bumper on first and then maybe drill the holes, or possibly mark the hole once the bumper is bolted up and then drill it afterwards. So we're not going to pre-drill anything just yet. We already have the tailpipe disconnected, so we got that done already. The next step is they say to use the stick bolts and place them in the frame in the existing frame holes. So we'll show you that right now. We noticed that there's some dirt in the frame rails. So what we're going to do is take an air compressor. We're just going to utilize one of the existing holes in the frame and push it out towards the back. And Sean has a little baggie to capture it so it doesn't blow all over the garage here. Here we go. Oh. To facilitate to get the bolts back where they need to be in the frame rails, they weld a little rod to it, so they call it a stick bolt. And so this enables us to be able to slide it down into the frame rail and get it where we needed to get it. One is dropping out here, and then the other one is going to come through and come out this hole above the other one, like so. We're going to do that with the other side. To get the bumper slid in place, we actually can't have this sticking out just yet, so I'm just going to set this in, the frame rail out of the way, in position, ready to go through once the bumper gets there, we could slide it in. So right now, it's just Sean and me. Ideally, if you had two buddies that aren't totally weak, that have some muscles to them, they would bring the bumper in position while the third guy gets a bolt started on either side, and then your buddies can let go and you can cinch everything up and get ready to drill the other necessary holes. Since we don't have a third person, we're going to utilize the transmission jack to kind of help us. So we're going to bring the bumper rested in place on the transmission jack, and then we're going to roll it underneath with this supporting a lot of the weight. Sean on one side, me on the other side. We're going to get the bumper slid in place, and then we're going to try to get one bolt started on each side and then go from there. When we're getting the bumper in place, we are going to have to be pushing the tailpipe out of the way to make clearance for the bumper so we can get it on. Okay, we're going to lift this sucker. Remember, lift with your legs. Okay, it's on the jack. So the bumper's not quite high enough yet, so I'm going to go up with the transmission jack.
Alright, I got a bolt started.
You got a bolt started? Okay. Let me see if I can get one on this side. Okay, I got one started on this side. So on both sides, Sean and I got the factory bolts started. These are the finer thread bolts that come with the kit. Give you a relation what we're talking about. This is the rear mount that we just installed from Sonoran Steel. And then you go forward. This is the stick bolt that faces downward. We're going to get a nut and washer on this, and then we're going to stick the other stick bolt through there and get a nut and washer on that. The instructions said something about pre-drilling this hole, but this upper hole, they said nothing about pre-drilling this one. And you can drill this one with the bumper on the vehicle. This one, even with a right angle drill, you don't have enough room to drill it. So we're just going to mark it with a pen, and then we're going to pull the bumper off, drill the holes, and put the bumper back on. A little extra labor, but that's the way we're going to do it. If you're going to follow our lead, do yourself a favor and take a look at how the bumper is sitting on the vehicle. Make sure it's squared up the way you want it. What I'm talking about is how it's sitting on the vehicle. Is it looking good, matching up with the curvature of your fender flares? Taking a look from the rear, is spacing between the bumper and the body kind of equal on both sides? On my vehicle, I have a little bit of body damage, so mine's not actually equal, but this would be another good indicator of how it's sitting square on the vehicle. Other visual indicators to let you know that the bumper is on equally is maybe taking a measurement from this part of the bumper to this mount on the frame and seeing if it's equal on both sides. So this could be another visual indicator that your bumper is on squarely. Another visual indicator is the contour of the body in relation to the bumper edge. So if it looks equal all the way down the whole length of it. The whole idea is you mark the holes and drill once. You don't want to have to drill a second time or enlarge the holes if you find that you're a little bit off. So get the bumper exactly where you want it, mark the centers of the holes, and then pull the bumper off and do your drilling. A helpful thing, if you're not used to drilling anything, is take a center punch and punch the center of the hole. That gives your drill bit a purchase point, so it's not going to walk on you. So when you start drilling, the drill bit doesn't start moving on you. It's going to stay exactly where you want it, in the center of that hole. The bolts we're drilling for are 1/2 inch size, but I'm going to start with a smaller pilot hole, so I just chose a 3/16. Now we graduated to a 3/8, and I'll finalize it with a 1/2 inch. After we're done drilling the holes, we're just going to spinal it down to smooth out on the edges a little bit. All the supplied bolts end up being a 3/4 inch size. They're not metric, they're standard. So you'll have to use a 3/4 inch box end or socket or whatever you choose to tighten these bolts to the frame. If you're wondering if there's a torque spec for this, I just got them really tight with a big 1/2 inch ratchet. I didn't bother looking up a torque spec or a suggested torque spec. I just got them nice and tight. To finalize the installation, CBI says to work these stick bolt rods back and forth until they break off. But what I was thinking and what Sean was thinking is that, what if you want to pull your bumper off at a later date for whatever reason, and now that you don't have the rods connected to the bolts to help you remove them and then get them back in, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put some vacuum hose and slide it down the whole length of the rod to where it will make it less likely to make noise as I'm driving down the road. This is the size vacuum hose I chose. It's an inner diameter of 6 millimeters or 7/32. To get the right length, I held one end up to the end of the rod, and then I brought the other end, which you can't see in the frame, to the bolt. And that gave me an idea of how long it needed to be, so I knew if I was getting it the full length of the rod. Then, where the hose met up with the bolt, I make a mark on the hose. This way it'll let me know how far it needs to slide in to be the full length of the rod. To make it easier to slide the vacuum hose along the stick tube bolt rods, I removed these 2 bolts because I found that as I tried to slide the vacuum hose along the stick tube rods, it would hit the bolt and make it a little harder to slide it. So with these bolts out of the way, I can slide it down the rod easier. So you just get the vacuum hose on there and just slide it down. What I found that makes it a little bit easier to get it down the full length of the rod is you might have to pull on it a little bit to get it to move away from the other rod or maybe up against the frame rail. So just move it around a little bit, and then once you reach the mark that you made, you'll know that you hit the full length of it. Then you could cut it off and you're done with that. Once you got the vacuum hose slid down the whole length of the stick tube bolt rods, a final thing I did is I took a zip tie and I zip tied the 2 stick tube bolt rods together so they can't move around and vibrate. Doing all this, I think it's going to prevent any sounds coming from these stick tube bolt rods rattling around inside the frame. Hopefully this is going to work to allow me to keep these stick tube bolt rods onto the bolts so I can have an easier time removing the bumper at a future date if I find I have to. Near the beginning of the video, I talked about where I mounted the Radflow external reservoirs on my frame was most likely going to get in the way of the bumper, and it did. Right now, these bumper sides are covering the holes I was using to mount this reservoir. As of now, I just rigged up a way to hold it on there. I don't know if this is going to be permanent or not, but I'm kind of tired of drilling holes in my frame. I had to drill a lot of holes in the frame for this lift for mounting the external reservoirs and to securely hold the reservoir line to the frame. So what I came up with is I put a thick rubber hose. I think it's a coolant hose, but it's really thick, and I captured it on either side with a large hose clamp. I captured the 2 hose clamps that are around the reservoir with a 3rd hose clamp, which is capturing the round part of the bumper here, the support beam. As a final thing, I cable tied it on either side of that bumper support piece. Is it kind of janky? Yeah, it's kind of janky, but it's on there really firm and it's not going anywhere. And until I could figure out another way to MacGyver a way to mount it, I'm just going to leave it as is for now. So you could follow my lead on this one if you have a Sonoran steel Radflow lift, but hopefully you could come up with a better, more clean solution to mounting these if you happen to have a CBI rear bumper like I do. MacGyver away and figure out a better way if you can. Here's what the final result looks like. If you don't have a swing out bumper, just imagine that's not there. And also imagine that one's not there. I got a dual swing out, so that wouldn't be there if you don't have a swing out bumper. And here's what it looks like on the driver's side. And this is what it looks like from the rear. This concludes part 1 of this video series. If you don't have a swing out bumper, you're done. Congratulations on installing your CBI Hybrid or your CBI Plate bumper. If you have a swing out bumper, whether it's a single swing out or dual swing out, continue on to part 2 and I'll show you how to do that. Thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. We will of course be back with more videos. Thank you for subscribing. Take care. Bye bye.